Welcome to CrimsonCast. Galen Clavio here, along with Scott Caulfield. We're back. We did a live show last week on Sunday, and it got a pretty good response. So we're happy to be back once again and talking about the wonderful world now of IU basketball. I guess relatively wonderful, as it's certainly brightened up a little bit here over the course of the last couple of weeks. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the two games that occurred this week. We're certainly going to talk about the two games that are scheduled for this upcoming week. And we're going to talk about several other things. We got some questions from listeners and viewers that we're going to try to address. If you've got questions, we'd love to have them, so you can tweet them to us at CrimsonCast, or if you want to, you can put them in the chat down below or on the side or wherever it is on the screen. Anyway, I'll bring in my partner here, Scott Caulfield. Scott, this is my second podcast of the day so far. What did you do earlier?
Not podcasting. I was doing some like building some shelves in the house, doing a little woodworking on that. Yeah, dinner with the boys, and not cheating on you with another podcast. That's for dang sure.
Well, I mean, this was a Crimson Cast, and Chronic Hoosier on, and we were talking about the wonderful world of IU student tickets and what makes the kids come or not come to games. But as I mentioned on that podcast, that was really where CrimsonCast kind of started. I was telling people that you and I ended up partnering on 4 tickets.
Yep.
My sophomore year, your junior year, and we'd known each other a little bit before that, but that was really where the CrimsonCast bond was forged.
Yep. We saw some tough games again. I think we did 2 years in a row basketball tickets.
Yeah, we did sophomore year, my sophomore and my junior year. And like sophomore year was the beginning of the year was the Temple game where I think it was Guyton hit the 3 at the end of the game and they end up winning. And then there were a couple of other notable games that year.
Well, you might not have told this story, because I always tell it that people who haven't been to Assembly Hall, and especially like when they did the Simon Scott refresh and they had like the new scoreboard, I was like, that's not the new scoreboard. Like the new scoreboard was the one they just had. Like I remember you and I always tell the story, like back in the day, like there's so many garbage seats in Assembly Hall, but you and I used to, the student tickets, you have like the couple in the corners where the balcony cut you off. There were times where like there was a couple games where you and I could not see any scoreboard, like not like the big one, like any of them, because you and I are dorks. Like we would bring a scorecard and we would literally have been keeping score of the game, and then like we'd go down the aisle and like look at the scoreboard and then come back up. Like there were seats where you could not see a scoreboard.
It was one of those deals where it was just rough. I remember the Ted Valentine game, which was at the end of my sophomore year. I don't think you were there for whatever reason.
No, I was there with my dad. Like I had gone with my dad.
Okay.
I had this kind of dicky move where like my dad and I had tickets with a professor that were like row like 38. And so I kind of would be like, when the tickets were really bad with you, I was like, I'm going with my dad. And then like when they were good with you, I went with you. So I apologize.
Yeah. And no, it's fine. I mean, it ended up working out, but like that game, the tickets were really bad. And I think that we were in like EE in the balcony. And, that was my vantage point for that whole, scenario with Valentine and with Record getting injured and all that stuff. But there were games like that. I remember one game sitting in AA, like right against the wall, and the reverb was so bad from the band that you could see the band playing, and then the note would come like a second later. It was that level of bad in terms of the the acoustics. So no, I mean it's.
And I went with my wife to see Ohio State when they had Michael Redd and I think Scooney Penn, and like our tickets were balcony row 1, which is still one of the more frightening things. Like going down those stairs, like I was worried like I would trip and then just be a ceiling tile before the Iowa game type scenario. Like it's frightening walking down those stairs. But I went with a neighbor to the Michigan State game.
Okay.
I'm going to go to tickets. I'm not sure where you went with that podcast yet with the students, but here's what I would say to IU students. Like you should be like, the fact they're not showing up as much as they should be happy with what they have. Because I went with a neighbor who went to Michigan State, and he'd been to a couple IU games, and he was even mentioning like this is louder than East Lansing gets. And I was like, well, how many games do you go to? And like must have been fun with the Izzone. He's like, I went to probably 2 my whole time in college. I'm like, really? You're a basketball fan? He's like, dude, tickets are impossible to get. Like, you have to camp out for a couple days, or, big games a week. He's like, it was just, and even then, like, you may not get in. It's like, it was just a pain in the ass to go. And I was like, that like, it's just weird to me, because I mean, IU basketball tickets were tough to get. Like, all you had to do was make sure you got there, signed up, and then, like, you got tickets. It's weird to think that other students in other Big Ten universities basically can't go to basketball games.
Yeah, or maybe more to the point, most of them don't want to go to the basketball games. Like, it's not as big of a deal from a cultural perspective, and that is definitely something that we should talk about at some point. Maybe not on this podcast, but it's something to keep in mind, is like the cultural differences from school to school.
Yeah, we got like 3 more weeks of basketball, and then we have a lot of summer we can do that. I still want to do people, please request this. I still want to do you and I watching Blue Chips and just doing a talk over.
I figured out how to do that. We're going to do that this summer. I figured out how to do it. Anyway, but let's go ahead and talk about what's going on with the team right now.
Yes.
Because there's a lot to talk about. And, this IU team continues to impress. And, we'll start very briefly earlier in the week as they knock off Illinois. That was a tough game. It was certainly a game where I think IU's resolve was tested against an Illinois team that they're not particularly talented, but they also don't go away. And, it was one of those games where not all the parts showed up well for IU. I mean, Devontae Green had a really tough game. He only scored 3 points. He had 4 turnovers. Zach McRoberts really didn't contribute a whole lot offensively. But, you had really balanced scoring. Al Durham came off the bench and scored 14 in that game. Justin Smith scored 13. Juwan Morgan and Robert Johnson contributed strongly to that. And even though it was a little touchy there in the last, 10 minutes of the game, IU figured out a way to make it happen. And I was really impressed with that game. I thought that it showcased a kind of resolve that we did not see out of IU basketball, say last year, or, in 2014 or 2015, where, the team tended to wilt when, particularly in situations where they had a lead and then they kind of let the other team back into it. So that it bled over into the Iowa game, which we'll spend more time talking about, because
when I would say that resolve even to this season. I mean, it's a little bit of different circumstances, like Indiana State and, Fort Wayne, we basically just kind of seemed to give up near the end of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those deals where the when your offense is your identity, which I think was very much the case under Tom Crean. If the offense isn't working, or if it doesn't seem like it's keeping up with the opposition, it's very easy to think, okay, I can't keep this up. Like, I'm going to have to let up here. Whereas, this team is really forged around defense and not turning the ball over. And if you're able to defend and you're able to not turn the ball over, you can stay in games for a hell of a long time. And that is something that I've been really impressed with this team on so far through the season. And I think that game versus Iowa that they had this weekend was a great exemplar of that. I mean, this was a weird game. Iowa starts off and, they're leading by 10. It was 17-7. I think they'd hit all of their shots up to that point. And at one point, I think the lead got all the way up to like 23-10. And IU, I mean, that whole first half, it felt like they would chip away a little, couldn't quite get back into it. They get it back to within, I think, 5 at half. And then all of a sudden they go on this big run and they get up by 13. And then the bottom falls out of that. And Iowa comes back and I think they tied the game. And somehow Indiana was able to figure out a way to pull out the victory there. I mean, it was really, you can look at the opponent and say, well, Iowa sucks. And I'm not going to argue Iowa does suck, but a road game in the Big Ten at a place where you don't always win, that was a big step for this IU team, particularly when you consider some of the statistical issues that IU was facing throughout the course of that contest. I mean, it wasn't just that, they were having trouble defending. It was also that Juwan Morgan was in foul trouble and didn't have his same offensive game. It was also, you had, Justin Smith was in foul trouble and Freddie McSwain was facing foul trouble. And, you didn't get anything out of Al Durham off the bench. You got less than nothing out of Josh Newkirk off the bench. And yet they figured out a way to win the game. Rob Johnson really came through maybe his best game of his career as an IU player in a hostile environment. And, even with some difficulties with execution down the stretch, they played really good defense on their final possession, and they managed to come away with the victory. And I was really impressed by that.
Yeah, I mean, and for those who were thinking that, Iowa just sucks, and I had a bit of that, but you look at their games at home, their last 5 or 6 games at home, they played us tough. Going back, they played Michigan State, lost by 3. That was a really close game. They beat Minnesota. They beat Wisconsin. They lost to Purdue kind of going away, but you go back, like they lost to Ohio State, but it was only a 9-point game. They lost to Michigan. It was only a 7-point game. Back to Penn State, that's like in December. But, you look at it, like Iowa has been playing really tough at home. So just to say Iowa's 3-12 or whatever, and 3-13 and they suck, it doesn't really stand up. I mean, that's a tough place to play, and they've been playing tough on the road. So, I think both the games were they were great wins because they're both games where, we had the advantage. They're games that we have to win. And we've seen it like with football all the time. This is sometimes one of the toughest things to do as a young team or a team kind of getting to that next level is how do you close out and win games you're supposed to win? And yeah, it wasn't like super pretty. We didn't blow them out, but we got the job done both at home and on the road. And it sets us up in a nice spot where I think we look at the next, set and it's like, all right, if we can get 1 or 2, we're in a good spot.
Yeah, and the next set is certainly what we talk about here. As IU's on a 4-game winning streak. They're 16-12 right now, and we're going to talk about realistic scenarios here. I don't consider the NCAA a realistic scenario. We'll talk a little bit about that scenario because it's not completely outlandish. If you also think that unicorns aren't completely outlandish, it's certainly possible. But the more realistic options here, I think, are looking at what this team needs to do to secure an NIT berth. And they've done all of the heavy lifting in terms of the games they had to win. They had 4 games in a row against, really 4 of the 5 worst teams, maybe the 4 worst teams in the conference at this point. Rutgers, Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota, and they won all 4 of those games. And
which I think is funny because and I love Zach in the Indy Star, our friend Zach Oster, but he was right. He had a story about this is probably just he had to write something like this, but kind of like who knew, like, wow, Indiana finally has an NIT chance. Like just 2 weeks ago, this team was left for dead, and it's like first off, Zach, listen to our podcast a little more. But you and I were talking about this. Like, I'm just kidding. But it's like it is like a schedule. This is just a schedule thing. Like that Purdue, Ohio State, Michigan State, like probably going to be 3 losses. You look at this, like should have been 4 wins. Like I think that you and I were both, leaving looking at the NIT even in late January, just kind of knowing that we had a real shot to win 4, 5, maybe even 6 in a row to finish this out. So yeah. I do think it is kind of funny that people are now like, oh my gosh, like this team was dead on arrival after losing 5 of 6, and now they have a shot at the NIT. It's like, no, you got to look at who we're playing, and this schedule was kind of had a death stretch there, was kind of backloaded with some easier type games.
Well, yes. However, I do think that it's important to keep in mind that this IU team, the mix of players and the way that they were playing, it was not a foregone conclusion that they were going to be able to raise their game up to be able to play well in those contests. That's the thing for me with this team is they're still, they're shooting better, unquestionably, but they're still not shooting well overall. And, the season 3-point percentage is still, it's above the 300 mark now. They're at 32.5%, which is nice. In conference, they're shooting about 34.4%, which is still not great.
So if 200 is the Mendoza line, like what's the Indiana 300 line? Is that like
well, it's hard to say, but I'll tell you what, where they've been worse in conference play than overall is free throw shooting. Consider it's been awful. How many points this team gives up from the free throw line. They're shooting 63.8% in conference play from the free throw line, which is dead last in the conference. And yet they've figured out a way to win games, and they're doing it through defense. Their defense has just gotten better and better, and it's made them an entertaining team to watch in a completely different way from, how if IU was entertaining to watch in the past 4 or 5 years, how those teams were entertaining to watch. They're entertaining because they play good defense. They're getting stops. They're turning their opponents over, and with some notable exceptions, they're not making dumb passes or being careless with the ball at the end of the game. And that's a kind of an enjoyment of watching IU that we haven't had in a long time. And so, look, I think I understand where you're coming from, and I also understand where Zach's coming from.
Yeah.
It was not a foregone
good-natured love. Good-natured love to Zach.
Absolutely. I just think it was not a foregone conclusion that this team was going to coalesce. And you think about the fact that they've coalesced with Devontae Green in the starting lineup and with Freddie McSwain in the starting lineup. And I don't know that anybody, certainly not at the beginning of January, would have predicted that those two guys would have been not just starters, but would have been primary contributors the way that they have been down the stretch for this team. So,
and to your point on being fun to watch and coalescing, I was going to anyway, but like I'm actually really excited to come down for the Ohio State game on Friday. Much like I remember you with the the 2011-12 team, like you went to Atlanta to watch them play Kentucky in the Sweet 16, which I wish I could have. But I mean, your point was like I want to spend another game with this team. Like I enjoy this team, and I'm feeling that way with this team also. Like it's been an interesting journey, a lot of ups and downs, but this is now like a really fun team to watch. And like, for me, it's like, I'm excited for one more game with this team.
Yeah, no. And, I know when that Iowa game started the way that it did, I was like, oh man, because I went out to Nick's with a bunch of people. Nick's was crowded. And I was like, man, this is a bummer. And when they started to chip back into it, like people grabbed a hold of it. Like the people, there were two things that people really got excited about. One was yelling at Dan Dockich, and the other was getting really excited about the fact that IU was coming back at that game. And that place exploded. Every time Robert Johnson hit a three, people went nuts. It was a kind of a passion that was cool to see. And certainly you wouldn't have predicted it, at New Year's, given the way that people felt. There was a comment in the chat from Sasser 8487. Constant improvement, which we would have closed out a couple more games early on in the season, I think would be a tough out in the tournament if we were in it. And I've seen that expressed in a number of places. I've seen it expressed on the message boards. I've seen people on Twitter talk about it. And, we talked about this a little bit last week. I agree, it would have been great if we'd been able to not lose the IPFW or Indiana State games. But at the end of the day, I really think this team had to kind of go through the fire to figure out how to play basketball and to understand what they were doing wrong. The idea that we could have won those games and also had the development curve that we ended up on so far this season, I think that those two don't really exist in the same reality. And it's unfortunate because, like, I agree with the gentleman, or maybe it's a lady's comments, I'm not sure, but I agree what they're saying, that this would be a tough out in the tournament sort of team. But by the same token, this is a completely different team from the team that we saw starting the year. It's really fascinating, like how much this team and how much this roster has morphed just in, like 3 months.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think like to get to this point, we had to go through those losses. Like I don't think we're at this point without those losses. Like the team had to realize they had to kind of buy into the system, and it took some pretty bad losses to get there. That being said, while I do agree that I think we'd be a tough out in the tournament, I think for the long-term health, and we kind of talked about this last week, how a lot of the guys here are going to be key as we move forward in the next couple of years. I think for the long-term health, I'd be happier with us getting a top 4 NIT berth and trying to get some games in there. Like I think for this team, getting a couple wins in a tournament, maybe trying to get to New York as a goal, and like getting a little bit of, the big lights, big stage kind of thing is probably better than us maybe playing in the first 4 in Akron and being a tough out, or maybe playing one game in the tournament being a tough out and losing, right away. Like I think from a building perspective, I think making a nice, couple wins in the NIT could be more helpful.
I'll always take a tournament berth, like an NCAA tournament berth. Like I'd rather go and lose once. I think you get more out of that than the extra NIT practice. But I think the realistic, outcome here would be the NIT, and I'm totally fine with that. Let's talk a little bit about the games this week, and then we'll get to some questions and comments from viewers. So you go to Nebraska, and this is a game that the computers are saying IU is going to lose. Of course, the computers also said IU was going to lose the Iowa game. These are two relatively close teams. If you look at their conference-only statistics, Indiana's offensive efficiency is in conference 102, and Nebraska's is 105. Indiana's defensive efficiency is 99.8. Nebraska's is 100.5. Now, Nebraska's kind of in a curious spot because they finally lost today. They ended up dropping the game at Illinois. So that pretty much, in my opinion, ends their at-large hopes. That's not a game you can really afford to lose if you're Nebraska and you're expecting to try to get an at-large bid because they just don't have much on their resume. So you're now going into Lincoln, maybe against the deflated Nebraska team. It's actually, strangely enough, it's more, I would say the IU almost has more to play for here than Nebraska because if IU does have any chance of going to the NCAA tournament, they absolutely have to have some quality wins on their resume. And this is, you have 2 games in a row here where you have chances at quality wins. At Nebraska would absolutely qualify as a quality win, and at home versus Ohio State would qualify as well. And this is it's an interesting matchup because you're certainly you're not playing a Northwestern team that's going to overwhelm you with size. You're not playing a Nebraska team that's going to overwhelm you with their offense. The numbers are not terribly off. Neither team shoots the ball particularly well. Both teams do a pretty good job of defending. Unlike playing Michigan State or playing Purdue, it's hard to look at the setup and say, well, there's this or there's that matchup that IU just can't really deal with. I kind of like their chances going into this contest. And I'm curious to see how they play in this sort of a matchup. It's a late game. It's a 9 p.m. Eastern start. And there's a lot on the line really for IU because, this would, I think, cinch up an NIT berth, but it also opens the door potentially for there to be more.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the other way. Now, granted, Nebraska kind of pulled a shit schedule card from the Big Ten. They didn't play Purdue, Ohio State, or Michigan State at home this year. They didn't get any of them at home. But that being said, they haven't lost a home game in the Big Ten. So, granted, they played kind of the bottom half of that Big Ten schedule at home, but they've only lost 1 game at home this year, and that was a 1-point loss to Kansas. And they just looking at the schedule they played and the way they played, they seem to just be a notch above us. And they seem to be one of those teams that they can't beat the Purdue, Ohio State, Michigan States, but they can beat everybody else. And they can beat teams they're better than. They can't beat teams, they can beat teams that are better than. They can't beat teams that are better than them. And I look at
they beat Michigan like a drum earlier this year.
Yeah, at home.
Yeah, right. Still.
That's where I look at it and say, I think them and Michigan are about the same. Like,
that's fair. Okay.
But and that's where I'm a little nervous going into this game. Just that they seem to be a really good home team. And it seems like this is the kind of game that they'd be able to beat. We're just a notch below them. And so I don't know. As I look at the 2 games ahead, I'm a little circling more of the Ohio State game again, just because we get a really good boost at home.
Yeah.
I think Ohio State's a better team than Nebraska. But the things that I do like, these are all kind of random, different thoughts, like that 9 p.m. start. I mean, it's 8 o'clock, I guess, Nebraska time, but it's a later start. Maybe it's just kind of a dead crowd. We can jump out to a little bit. That would be the hope. But I'm kind of nervous about the Nebraska game more than if I had to pick one, it'd be Ohio State over Nebraska.
Okay, well, let's jump to the Ohio State game because who knows what's going to happen in the actual game with Nebraska, but certainly Ohio State. That's a team that IU has played already. That didn't go so well. They lost 71-56 in that game. It was very similar to the first Michigan game.
Yeah,
where
it was just over in 5 minutes.
It was over in 5 minutes, and IU played them even the rest of the way, but it wasn't close. That said, a couple of things that I think all come to bear at once. You have the Assembly Hall effect, where you've seen IU play Duke close, play Purdue close, play Michigan State very close. Win against Penn State, who's turning out to be a pretty good team. They're leading at Purdue as we podcast this. Win at home against Maryland. So you have that. You'll have the emotion of senior night. You'll have a crowd that, a team coming in, even if they lose the Nebraska game, a team that'll have come in having won 4 out of their last 5, or maybe having won 5 in a row.
And even losing Nebraska, you still have the same, like this win clinches an NIT berth.
And you're going up against a team that'll still be top 15, I'm guessing. Right. That does turn the crowd on in a way that, say, playing Illinois or playing Minnesota at home does not.
Right.
There is a magic in Assembly Hall. And look, I think Ohio State certainly had an admirable season. But by the same token, it's not shocking if they at some point turn into a pumpkin, because they were not that awesome. The starting the season off, they were a team that had talent, and I think that Chris Holtman's done an excellent job with them. But the idea that they suddenly transformed into a team the talent caliber of Michigan State or Purdue, that's not what's occurred. And I think that's somewhat borne itself out over the course of the last couple of games. They seem to be struggling away from home, that Purdue game notwithstanding. They lose at Penn State, they lose at Michigan. You do really have to like Indiana's chances in that game.
And also, I mean, take out the Michigan State game on January 7th. Like, they had a nice front-loaded Big Ten schedule where they kind of got to play they got to play the front end of the schedule we're playing now. Like, they had a couple, about 5 or 6 games there where they just kind of beat up on teams that they are better than.
And the defense has come a long way for IU, just even in the time that has existed between the last game and this game. I mean, that Ohio State-Indiana game was on January 30th, and I feel like the defensive effort and just the way that the lineups set up, IU played a grand total of 8 players in that game. And of those 8 players, Josh Newkirk played 14 minutes. Al Durham played 9 minutes. You got, that was the game that Devontae Green kind of broke out. He scored 20 points in that contest. You got 2 points out of Robert Johnson in that game. You got 2 points out of Justin Smith in that game. It feels like a different sort of IU team now than what we saw 3 weeks ago. And, even if it's the same Ohio State team, between being on the road and the maturation that this IU team has shown over the last 3 weeks, it seems like it's going to be a different sort of game.
Now, and I know none of the players are the same, none of the coaches are the same, so everything's different. But it's like we have kind of a cosmic, we owe one against Ohio State, because I remember the senior night in Zeller's sophomore year, Oladipo's junior, that team that was ranked number 1, right, where we won the Big Ten. Like, that was our senior night was against Ohio State.
So you mean the game we cut the nets down after losing that game?
Yeah, they beat us. It was like such a deflating loss. It was like a snowy night. And then, we cut the nets down. It's like Jordan Halls and those guys were doing their senior speeches, even though we lost, we cut the nets down. Like, it just sucked all the way around. Like, we owe, like, a great flip would be kind of a unexpected season where we can win on senior night against a better Ohio State team and kind of get a flip for what we really owed, 5 or 6 years ago.
I just, I'm with you, but I feel like when you cut the nets down after losing a game, I feel like whatever karmic advantage you might have had.
It's like breaking a mirror. It's like you get 7 years of bad karma.
Right. No, you burn any potential positive karma that you might have possibly had by doing something so stupid like that. So I don't know. Do we need to like ritualistically burn some big heads before the Ohio State game? I mean, should we have like a Diet Coke bonfire in front of Assembly Hall? Like,
we burn the big heads and we put it out with Diet Coke, and then we all grab our belt and shake it up a little bit. That might be the way to, if there is a curse, to figure out a way to break the curse. I do think that your larger point is accurate. I think that the opportunity is absolutely there for this IU team to win that game on Friday. And I think the fact that it's a Friday night game, it's on Fox. It'll be a much better crowd than what we saw, because it won't be on Valentine's Day. Right. I think all of those things are going to come together. It's going to be a really awesome atmosphere, and I think that that's the sort of atmosphere that this IU team can really thrive off of. And if they can keep getting shooting, if they can keep getting the shooting out of Rob Johnson, if they can keep getting the shooting out of Devontae Green, that opens up so much for the offense. If maybe one game this year IU gets actual home court advantage from the referees, that would be awesome. I mean, this would be a great night for it. So look, I think all of that stuff, if that lines up, even if they only win one of these two, you're looking at a record of 17-13 going into the Big Ten tournament. Wait, before you get to that, real quick, just last thing on Ohio State.
Yeah.
Colin Hartman, Rob Johnson, Tim Priller, Josh Newkirk, Freddie McSwain. Who wins senior night speeches?
I mean, it's going to be Priller.
That's
you know it's going to be Priller. I mean, it's like I can't imagine a scenario where it would be anybody else. I guess the question is how how long is this senior night going to go? Like, I'm trying to remember, like, there have been immensely long senior nights when like 3 guys graduated. Like with 5, I'm almost frightened for how it's going to go.
Yeah, it could be a while. I mean, you kind of got to tell Newkirk, like, I mean, you've been here 2 years, and like same with McSwain. Like, you guys don't just keep it short. I mean, I'm with you. I would put Priller as my odds-on favorite to win kind of senior night, but I could see Colin Hartman having something good to do,
but he's already done it.
Yeah,
remember? I mean, can't we just be like, Colin? Yeah, can we just replay? Although, like, he proposed to his girlfriend last year, so maybe that would be awkward if he did that again.
But if you want a value bet, I think the odds on like Freddie McSwain's like 10-1 to win senior night. Like, that would be a little bit out of the blue, but it wouldn't surprise me.
One thing real quick before we move on to Big Ten tournament and your questions.
But go to your point. I want to hear about the NIT, your thoughts on the yeah.
We'll get to that. Matt Blaska pointed out that IU had a 1-day turnaround after the Purdue loss to do the Ohio State game. And I think it's important to note that this week, Nebraska's got a 1-day turnaround after having to travel to Illinois and losing to Illinois before playing IU in Lincoln. Whereas IU's got the extra day off. So there is something to be said for that. Now, IU having to travel all the way to Lincoln, maybe that mitigates it somewhat, but still they'll have an extra day of rest that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So just something to keep in mind. Anyway, I want to go ahead and get to the NIT versus NCAA conversation real quick, because it ties into the Big Ten tournament. I've heard people talking about, well, if IU wins their last 2 and they get to the title game of the Big Ten tournament, they'll get put into the field. It's not completely outlandish, but it would be a very difficult thing, because right now, I do a lot of bracketology. Actually, I'll have my latest bracket up tonight sometime.
When do you start going daily?
Not until the week of conference tournaments. That there's just not enough that changes in between now and then to go any more than like a couple of times a week. But
and I got, humble brag, Galen gets you're always 1 or 2 off. Like, you're 67 of the 68 teams. Like, your bracketology is the best in the country.
It's not that good. It's not. It's Andy Bottoms is better. There's actually a lot of people that have done better than me the last couple of years in terms of like the seeding. But I normally know what teams are going to get in the field. That's not. Yeah. By the end of it all, I appreciate the puffery. It's. But look, I mean, the issue that IU's got is pretty straightforward, is that they have no quality wins of note. Like the NCAA groups wins in like what are called tier 1 wins, tier 2 wins, tier 3 wins, tier 4 wins. And basically a tier 1 win is, did you win at home versus a top 30 team, a neutral court win versus a top 50 team, or a road win versus a top 75 team. And then the loss is also categorized. So the more losses you have in tier 1 or tier 2 versus tier 3 or tier 4, the better off you're going to be. The problem that IU's got is they have no tier 1 wins. They have 2 tier 2 wins, and one of them's at home. And they've got 2 losses in tier 4. I bet you can guess which 2 losses those are. And then they've got a tier 3 loss at Illinois. That's what really hurts them. Now, if they beat Nebraska and they beat Ohio State, that's going to give them probably the 6th seed, maybe the 5 seed, but probably the 6th seed in the Big Ten tournament. That will equate, if they get the 6th seed, they'll play the winner of the 11-14 game, which will be like, I don't know, Rutgers or Iowa, which they're not going to, if they need to win that game, but that won't give them anything that'll help them get to the tournament. So then the next round, they have to hope that whoever the 3 seed is, these days it's looking more and more like it would be Purdue. They have to hope that Purdue is there, and then they have to win that game. So now they've got 3 quality wins, and that might be enough to start the conversation. It might not be enough to outweigh the terrible losses, but it might be enough to at least start the conversation. And so much of that ends up being predicated on what else is going on in college basketball. If there are teams that have fallen off the map, if there are struggles that we're seeing in terms of, like Temple is falling off the map right now. Anyway, point being, the way that it sets up as you move forward is you have to beat Purdue if they are the 3 seed, and then you kind of have to hope that the team you play next, which would almost certainly be the 2 seed, is Ohio State, and you're able to beat them as well. Then I think, the momentum and the fact you'd be on like an 8 or 9 game winning streak, that would allow you to get to the tournament. And then the next round, they have to hope that whoever the 3 seed is, these days it's looking more and more like it would be Purdue. They have to hope that Purdue is there, and then they have to win that game. So that might carry you into maybe one of the last at-large spots in the field. I still think it's going to be a tough row to hoe, just because I think IU left way too much on the table. But it's not completely out of the realm of possibility at this point. And
you're also asking an IU team to win games in the Big Ten tournament, which in the last 20 years we just don't do.
Right.
You're asking us to get to the finals, which we've done once. So with far better teams. So it's like the Big Ten tournament. Maybe it's in New York, week up. Like maybe this is the year we finally figure it out. Like maybe this is what we've been needing all these years.
Yeah. Look, I mean, there was a question that we got from Andy that actually ended up asking about this. Hypothetically, what would it mean for Archie to win IU's first Big Ten tournament in his first year? Which, I mean, it'd be insane. It would be crazy. It'd be weird for it to happen in Madison Square Garden of all places.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not expecting that to happen, but crazier things have happened. I mean, people forget, Michigan last year, didn't even have their right uniforms to start the Big Ten tournament. They had to play in practice uniforms. I think they were the 8th seed, and they ended up winning the Big Ten tournament. They were an 8th seed. You're talking about an IU team that is going to come in as, probably the 6 or the 7 seed. And I mean, at this point, they're playing good enough defense. And if they get the sort of shooting that they got out of Rob Johnson, for a couple of games in Madison Square Garden, which is normally a pretty good shooter's arena, I mean, why not? There's nothing. If you look at what's going on at the top of the league, the big problem team would be Michigan State. Michigan State normally just blows off the Big Ten tournament.
They don't
that's the thing. The idea that that's the big scary team in the Big Ten tournament. I mean, if that's the case, sign me up. Because Purdue's trailing, to Penn State right now. They look dead on their feet. Ohio State, you're going to play. You're not going to be scared of Ohio State. So the possibility's there. Now, knowing IU's luck, they'll draw Wisconsin in their first game of the Big Ten tournament and lose, because that's
Ethan Happ will have 58 points.
Ethan Happ will set a Madison Square Garden record for points or something like that. I mean, that's the way that the world works with IU in the Big Ten tournament. But it would be such a mythology building exercise for Archie Miller to win the Big Ten tournament in his first year as IU coach. It would really be entertaining.
We could legitimately put a banner up. What bracketology NIT wise? Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on us getting a 1, 2, 3, 4 seed? What do we have to do? What do we have to do to get in the NIT, to get a protected seed? How do you see that?
It's tough to say. I mean, because the way that the NIT works, the 4 number 1 seeds are supposed to be the teams that were the last or the first 4 out of the NCAA tournament. And I mean, if you go off of my recent bracket, and I'm not saying I'm 100% right on this, but my first 4 teams out, I think were who was it? It was I think USC, Utah, I think Penn State, and maybe LSU. So that'd be the teams that would have theoretically the home court advantage for the first few games of the tournament until it got to Madison Square Garden. Now that will obviously change. Teams will fall in and out of the field, but that's how it's supposed to set up. Now, that does not necessarily mean that they will host games. I mean, famously, Kentucky was a 1 seed in the NIT in 2013, and they didn't host because they had a concert that night at Rupp Arena, and so they had to go to Robert Morris, and they ended up losing that game on a Tuesday night. It was a crazy night. But I think the chances of I mean, keep in mind last year IU was what was their record last year? They were 16. They were 17 and they were 18 and 15. They were 7 and 11 in the conference, and they were better in the power rankings. I mean, they were 44th, whereas this year they're 72nd in KenPom. And they were a 3 seed, and they should have hosted. And then Tom Crean didn't want to host, so that was another issue. But they would have hosted probably at least 1 game. And it's possible they could have hosted a second game depending on how things went. So I think if Indiana is going to make it in, I just get the feeling the way that they're playing right now, they would probably end up as an upper seed, which would give them at least 1 home game in the NIT. And then, I think that's what you're looking for. I mean, home games are tough for IU because they always come on spring break, and so you don't get the students, you don't get that buzz, so it's not the same sort of building. But that would be the scenario. Would be, I think, if IU splits their games here and then maybe wins a couple of games in the Big Ten tournament, I think that sets them up to host at least one NIT game.
If they lose in Nebraska and Ohio State, how much work do they have to do in the Big Ten tournament to get to the NIT?
I think to get to the NIT at that point, they got to win 2 games. They would have to win their opening round game, and then I think they'd have to beat at least one of the teams that they play next. And it may not even necessarily be a top 4 seed. It might be, like you might see Ohio State get upset by the 11 or the 10 seed or whatever it is. It might end up being something like that. But I think they'd have to do something along those lines in order to get into the NIT at that point.
Okay.
So some other questions that we'll get to. A couple of the questions from Andy. Okay, it's unlikely, but what is IU's dream Big Ten tournament bracket for it to have the best chance at winning the auto bid? Glad you asked. I think so much of what's going on right now in the Big Ten, I mean, everything's really fluid as far as the conference standings are concerned. And keep in mind the way the Big Ten tournament is seeded. Teams 11, 12, 13, and 14 have to play on Wednesday. 11 plays 14 and 12 plays 13. Then teams 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 play. 8 and 9 play each other. 5 plays the winner of 12, 13. 6 plays the winner of 11, 14, and then 7 plays 10. So all of that happens on Thursday. There's 4 games that go on there. Then that bracket advances, and you've got teams seeded 1, 2, 3, and 4 who have the double bye. I personally think if you look at the way the standings set up right now, Michigan State seems like the odds-on favorite to get the 1 seed. Ohio State and Purdue are going to go back and forth as far as the 2 seed. I think right now I would put my money on Ohio State, but it could be wrong. It could be Purdue. And I think the key for IU is being able to match up against one of those 2 teams relatively early on in the conference tournament. I think that, because what you're going to end up with is a situation where there's no chance that IU can get the 4 at this point, legitimately. And I think that there's only a very, very outside chance of being able to get the 5. So really you're looking at the 6, the 7, the 8, those, and I guess technically there's still a chance that they could be the 9 seed, but basically the 6, 7, and 8 look like the best bets. I think I'd like to see them where they get a chance to play Ohio State in the second game. Whatever that game happens to be, whether it's IU as the 6 playing Ohio State as the 3, which would mean that if IU is the 6, they're playing the winner of the 11-14. Ideally, I'd like to see that be the winner of Minnesota versus Rutgers, because I tend to think that those 2 are the worst of the 4 bottom teams, or at least the ones that IU matches up the best against. I really don't want to see Illinois again, and I'd really prefer not to see Iowa again. Yeah. But I think Minnesota and Rutgers both are teams that IU could do well against and build confidence going into a potential game against Ohio State. And I think that's the route. Now, there is certainly an argument to be made for the fact that Michigan State tends to just take the Big Ten tournament off. That might not happen this year because of the fact that there's a week off between the end of the Big Ten tournament and the end of the NCAA tournament. It's really longer than that. It's really a break of 10 days. And so the idea that Michigan State is going to rest guys and not worry about their seeding, this is the last chance Michigan State's going to get to impress the committee for basically a week until Selection Sunday. Something tells me they'll be taking the whole thing very seriously. So I just think that at this point, if you're going to get IU to the point where they could win the Big Ten tournament, you get on the side opposite from Michigan State, which is probably going to be that 2-3 side. And you hope that there's some upsets happening on the other end of the bracket. And you hope that you don't draw Michigan in the championship game.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the 6 seed is where we really want to be slotted into with what's available, because you're right. Like the 7 seed, I like the 6 seed because you're playing a team that has to play the night before. The 5 seed has the same thing, but with the 5, you're on the same side as the 1. So it's like the 6 is like the perfect little seed because your second game is against theoretically, one of the the 3rd seed, the second to worst of the top 4 seeds. So I think like the 6 is kind of that dangerous seed, and
I was reminded by Matt Blaska and Jay Horry that IU actually at this point can't be lower than the 7 seed. So So the 5 is still a possibility. The 6 is certainly a possibility. The 7 is a possibility. I think that the 6 or the 7 is the best route for winning the Big Ten tournament if you're IU.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks to Andy for that question. And let's see. I think we had a couple of other questions on that front that we wanted to address. Let me scroll back here real quick and look at the. We had a lot of tweets earlier on today. Actually, let's just go ahead and jump and talk about a couple of other things here because we're getting close to wrapping up. But one of the things to keep in mind is certainly how everything sets up for the offseason with IU. And we had a question from Jason Kennedy in the chat. Hi, Jason. Thanks for listening in. He said something. What was it? Archie is becoming Norman Dale. Will Romeo Langford be his Jimmy Chitwood? And this dovetails into a question that we had from our friend Andy. Let's say Romeo commits and IU has one open scholarship that it decides to want to use on a grad transfer, not looking for names, but describe the type of player that would be the best addition to IU's 2018-2019 roster.
Somebody from Michigan. I mean, we want to win the Big Ten. We get somebody from Michigan, like a grad transfer from Michigan. That's what you asked for.
That's a good point. Yeah, if we can get more, it's Wagner to transfer. I'd be totally on board with that. Well, okay, so we'll tackle the Romeo question second. This idea of whether he's going to come or not. But I think whether or not Romeo comes, I think that extra scholarship is something that needs to be utilized on a shooter, because at the end of the day, Romeo Langford would be a tremendous addition on a number of levels, but the biggest level that he would be a tremendous addition on is he would give IU a reliable outside threat. And while that has been a problem throughout the course of the year for IU, it's become slightly less so because Rob Johnson has had some good games shooting. Devontae Green has started to pick up his shooting. Rob Johnson's graduating, and the idea that you're going to have to
Devontae Green still hasn't had 3 or 4 games in a row where he's been consistent.
Yeah. So you need to have somebody who can come in and shoot the basketball.
Yeah.
And that to me, if you can get a Nick Zeisloff,
I would say exactly the same kind of guy. Zeisloff's perfect.
Yeah, but I think, to be honest, I'd somebody like Zeisloff, but with more athletic ability, so that he can contribute more on defense, would be the perfect fit. That sort of player, that kind of athletic 2-guard, or even a someone who can play the 3, but can go out and shoot on the perimeter and really stretch the defense. I mean, you're going to have guys coming off the bench as freshmen, maybe even starting, that are going to be able to shoot the ball. I mean, Demezie Anderson is certainly a guy that seems to have that potential. Rob Finnesick has certainly been able to score, but they're scoring at the high school level. They're shooting well at the high school level, and there is a big transition. And if you can go out and you can find a grad transfer who can come in and provide you an offensive spark that can open up the defenses a bit, that can give Juwan Morgan more room to operate, that to me is the best kind of asset. Even if you add a Romeo Langford, I still think you need to have someone else who has that sort of offense ability that they can come in and contribute in that phase of the game.
I agree.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I just said there's no other counterpoint. I totally agree.
Yeah. Now, as far as the Romeo Langford situation is concerned, who knows? I mean, last week I said, yes, I think he's coming to IU. I still think that. I don't have a whole lot of basis for thinking that, other than if you think about it logically, there doesn't seem to be a lot of great argument for going to Vanderbilt, other than I've got friends there, which, I mean, I'm sure that you had a college decision or two, not just you, but anybody in our audience that may have come down to, well, all my buddies are going to Ball State, so I think I'm going to go there too. That doesn't mean it was a good idea.
Right.
And I kind of feel that way about, Romeo potentially going to Vandy. I mean, if he wants to, it's his career, but
I mean, you said something that made me think the flip side is why did he wait to announce until the April timeline? And maybe it's because he wants to go to Vanderbilt, just doesn't want to get booed around the state of Indiana or get smack talk all around the state of Indiana. And he knows, I'm not going to go to IU, but I don't want to deal with it all year.
And maybe that's the case. I mean, look, who knows? I mean, the family's done an excellent job of keeping it under wraps, and I mean, I think they deserve to be.
When will he announce? April?
What he has said is that he's going to announce around the McDonald's All-America game. So that's first weekend of April, I think. Okay. So it's going to happen around that time. And whether it happens at the game or whether it happens sometime before the game or afterwards, I don't know. But certainly it's something that everybody's keeping an eye on. I just think people need to relax a little bit. Like no one is going to really have an effect on whether he signs or not. This seems to be a very it's a decision that he's making on a personal level. It's a business sort of decision. I think he's going to come. I think that is it could be very transformative for this roster. I think it would be fascinating to watch Archie Miller, being able to coach a guy like that and having that be kind of the beginning of the Archie Miller recruiting pipeline for really like highly rated talent from the state of Indiana coming to IU. I don't think that Archie needs Romeo Langford as a recruit to like prove anything. I think he's proven quite a bit already. And I think like just with his recruiting, not to mention the stuff he's done coaching wise, but from the standpoint of, I've seen people say, well, Archie's got to land this guy. That's like, no, like, I mean, the IU wasn't even really, I mean, they were on the radar, but they were about as distant on the radar as you could get with Romeo Langford while still being considered a team on the list. But people were not talking about Romeo Langford as likely to come to IU. And I don't think anybody is under any illusion that if Tom Crean was still the coach, that Langford would, have even had IU on his list for this long.
Yeah, and that's what I've been telling people is that, I think the real win here is that we got to the top three. I don't want to say moral victories, but, recruiting is fickle and the kid's a teenager. I mean, lay off him. But, it is kind of odd that, it's not like Bryce Drew has had years to deal with, Romeo at Vanderbilt. He's just been there 2 years at Vanderbilt. But you had a lot of guys in this. You had, Roy Williams going after him for years. And, it's tough for any program to come in at the last minute on a 5-star with these other high-level programs who've been recruiting him for years and just come in at the end and get there. And that's kind of what Archie did. I mean,
like Roy Williams won the national title in the first
the next day. Yeah,
this is Romeo Langford the next day. I mean, the fact that IU's come as far as they've come. I mean, I'm not
to win.
I mean, I'm not handing out participation trophies for recruiting, but the fact that they were able to participate is unique in recent IU basketball lore. So, good job on that.
And I think it's a positive. Imagine now what Archie's going to do when he has the time to go after some, the Romeo Langford of 5 years from now. He actually has the time to go after them in the proper manner and not kind of been playing from behind the 8 ball the whole time.
Yeah. We had a question from Jay.
That said, I hope he comes.
Oh, yeah, trust me. I hope he comes. Like the people that are arguing that, I hope he doesn't come because he's going to be a one and done. That might be the dumbest thing I've heard out of the fan base. And I've heard some dumb things out of the fan base. But like, yeah, let's take this guy who's going to be like would be a lottery pick this year if he came out, and let's just not use him because he doesn't want to be here for 2 years. I'll never understand that philosophy. Anyway,
yeah.
Jay Horry asked a question about next year, not involving recruiting. So I feel like we should address it. IU will likely have 11 non-conference games next year. Louisville at home, Butler in Indy, the ACC Big Ten Challenge game, a likely Gavitt game, so Big East opponent. How does Archie fill the other 7 games out?
Well, it's not going to be Grand Canyon and Arkansas State and Townsend.
Grand Canyon's not a terrible program. I mean, they're actually fairly decent. Anyway, go ahead.
I mean, I think what everyone has been hoping for is that we can get one more marquee game in Assembly Hall. I think would be nice. I think there's some nice home and homes available there. Like, Kansas is kind of sitting out there as a possible home and home. I think getting the Louisville game has been good. Everyone wants to bring Kentucky back, but there's still other teams around here that would be interesting. I mean, it'd be funny to get Vanderbilt just with all that's been going on, like throwing them on the schedule would be kind of fun.
They would hurt our RPI too much. No, absolutely not.
I mean, but Arizona's out there with the brother thing. UCLA would still be interesting. So I think that it'd be fun to get one more of those. But I think what we're going to see is, and again, I just get the sense from Archie that what we're not going to see is I don't think he's going to shy away from playing the Indiana States, the IPFWs. Like I think it's almost going to be like I want to go back and kind of win the state as well. So I don't think we're going to see what we saw the last couple of years where like well, we lost IPFW and then we're never going to play them again. Right. You know, I think you're going to see more, you know, maybe not in-state teams, but just local regional teams that are good, and hopefully one more big addition to the schedule.
I won't be shocked. I think the IPFW series is over, or the Fort Wayne series.
Right.
Sorry, guys. But I wouldn't be shocked to see them go
like to Ball State or something. Or...
No, to go to the Holman Center
to
play Indiana State. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if that was like a home and home and home. And I think that'd be good. I mean, I think that that would be an interesting benchmark sort of game for IU. You know, as far as the other games that that IU ends up filling in, I think what I'm looking for is like the Eastern Michigan game this year. You know, that Eastern Michigan team came in pretty well regarded overall. You know, they're going to end the season, I think, and they're going to be top 200 in Ken Palm. You know, I think you'll probably see another, you know, team around that level. I think there's always going to be one or two teams that are at the lower end, just because you want to have, particularly with a freshman laden team like IU is going to have next year, you're going to want a couple of games just to kind of knock the rust off and make sure guys know what they're doing. You know, so I think at this point, I doubt that we see another name, like really highly named opponent. I mean, for those who missed this, it looks like IU has completely backed out of that New York event that they were originally supposed to play North Carolina, and then it got switched where ESPN announced that IU was going to play against West Virginia, and that's gone. It looks like so that doesn't exist anymore. Now it's like, okay, well, there's a hole in the schedule. Who does that get filled with? It'd be cool if the Kentucky series came back, and I think it'd be a really interesting benchmark for both programs to see, you know, that hook back up again. But I'm with you. I think that if they're going to play teams, they're probably going to play teams that are relatively close geographically, and you know, because I think that certainly helps in a bunch of different ways, be it recruiting, you know, as well as just kind of having a standard upon which you're measuring your team.
Over the next rapid fire, over the next 5 or 6 years, do we play Arizona?
It kind of depends on what happens with this FBI investigation.
Okay.
Is Sean Miller still the coach at Arizona? I think that's the question.
That's okay. Do we play Kentucky? Just yes or no?
Yeah.
Do we play Dayton?
No, I don't. No, I would.
Okay.
I would doubt that. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, look, and who knows? I mean, there's probably going to be series pop up that we're not expecting to pop up. I think that Archie really is a firm believer in, you know, if you schedule really well and you put yourself in a position where the NCAA looks at the teams that you played against and says, wow, they played a really, really tough schedule, you're going to get better consideration. I think we're seeing that now with the way that teams are being considered for the tournament. Like the teams that have played better opponents are getting better consideration. And you figure this year, IU's non-conference strength of schedule, right now it ranks, I think, 210th. And I mean, that's pretty good. If you look at it on Ken Palm, it's a little lower than that. It's 264th. You know, but last year it was 310th. So even that is a considerable jump up. You know, and I think you're going to see it jump up even more as time goes by. You know, if you go back and you look at what Archie Miller did at Dayton, his strength of schedule overall his last year, and keep in mind this is playing in the A10, which, you know, certainly is not as tough as the Big Ten, but his overall strength of schedule his last year at Dayton was 82, and his non-conference strength of schedule was 77. And you look down the list, I mean, they played 3 teams that you would consider to be bad: Austin P, Portland, and who was the third? VMI. And then the rest of the teams, I mean, there were a couple of teams that were up in the upper echelons. Ironically, played Vanderbilt last year, you know, but played St. Mary's, played Alabama on the road, played East Tennessee State, played Vanderbilt. I wouldn't be shocked if that's the teams that IU's playing, if they're matching up against an East Tennessee State or a Middle Tennessee State. Like, these are teams that are leading the Southern Conference, or they're leading Conference USA. That's the scheduling philosophy of the guy that's in charge of the program right now. It's going to take a couple of years to work through all of the contracts that were still around from the Crean era, but I see that unfolding that way over the course of the next couple of years.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think it's going to wrap it up for us. We really appreciate everybody tuning in once again. And, it's been fun. We're enjoying it. We'll have a lot to talk about on Sunday of next week, as IU will at that point have played 2 games, and Scott will have actually come down for one of them. So that's a situation in and of itself that's fascinating. But no, we'll talk to you after those 2 games, and it'll be a preview of the Big Ten tournament. We'll plan on being back on that Sunday night. So just 8:30 or so, just mark that on your calendar, and we'll be ready to chat with you. Scott, any final thoughts?
No, let's go win 1 or 2.
All right. Let's win both. I think just win both. Anyway, for Scott, I'm Galen. Thanks for joining us here, folks, on CrimsonCast. We'll catch you on the flip side. So long, everybody.